change it for every other organization.
They set up. All right.
I wanted to ask you, you didn't put anything about parking on the last couple of you know.
Next, yeah, we'll make sure we do that next time.
Okay.
I sent them a little note for parking. Well, no, this time it might take 2 hours, right?
No.
Okay. So it won't take anything if we don't respond.
Whenever you want to stop.
Might be almost done. You'll be surprised.
We'll be done before we're started.
Such bad shit.
All right, enjoy. I'm gonna go and do paperwork.
Okay, there, Rick said he was coming, right?
Rick who? He did, yeah. He
I'm
might
gonna go
not
and
have
check outside.
I was just wondering if he's upstairs. I've never seen him in this meeting, so.
See you later.
It said on the announcement where it was.
You know, it's fun. I was walking up the stairs today, and I woke up at some point last night. I thought I didn't look to see where the meeting's going to be, because I remember one year, a couple of years ago, I drove to the wrong place, and then I thought, oh, I'll do that first thing when I wake up. Came down, had everything in my folder, put a briefcase, make sure I didn't forget the briefcase.
End up the wrong place.
And then I'm walking up the stairs, and I thought, I didn't even look to see where the meeting was. It has to be.
Yeah, so I didn't want to, like, it starts getting really expensive when you're finished.
Now I just need Brian.
Okay, so we can, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, am I coming?
He said he would be late. Yeah, leaving at Boulder Creek.
Oh.
You're not gonna wait.
Boulder. Yeah, I wasn't, I just sent an email. I'm going to be here because the other day I sent an email and said I can't make it because I had a whole lot of people coming out of town with the ball and I thought, well, maybe we can push it to 3 o'clock. Goes to management advisor. Say less, let's just push it up to 3.
So what's your day?
Because, you know, I look at your agenda, I say,
Got the experience this year.
I've got
Special ed, 3 to 6 year olds.
So that's the midnight when I
The old one graduated from Michigan State Law.
Capital projects.
Yeah.
School projects.
Good.
Housing program.
Okay.
Requirements of this policy project is going to take, I would say probably the majority of my time.
Drop on.
Well,
All the time.
You know, there's these occasional times for the first period of time.
It's so funny because I've got,
Agenda.
More operations.
these people are here a lot for some.
I'm not sure why we didn't set up the way we usually do this.
This is what just potentially, so this is just the first set of the medium term and a longer term. So it's kind of a larger group effort, but we did it and, you know,
good, thank you.
So, we could go ahead and start if you want and just hope that he arrives by the time we need to vote on the
Can we open the meeting without a
You can
quorum?
open as committee of the whole.
Yes, it's permitted. It's voting that requires the.
Okay. Well, in that case, we'll have call to order. We'll have a roll call. I guess I'm providing, right?
Actually, you want me to call?
Okay.
Okay, I'll just go in order that they're listed here. Commissioner Blumenthal,
Yes.
Commissioner Abbey, Commissioner Carney,
Here.
Commissioner Koenig, Commissioner Brown,
Here.
Commissioner Reiswriter,
Here.
Commissioner Sounds, Commissioner Haynes, Commissioner Chambers. Yes. Oh, no.
No.
Sorry. And Commissioner Washburn.
Yes, here.
Okay.
Thank you to all of you who are here, and thank you for staffing here and members of the public. Any corrections to the agenda today? Any oral communications from members of the public who'd like to address the commission on items not on today's agenda? Anything? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda, which is approval of the minutes of our meeting on July 11th. Any questions or concerns? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to...
Do you have a quorum?
Oh, we can't do it.
We
We
don't
can wait
have a
until,
quorum.
Okay.
hopefully, Chinese will arrive.
Well then, would it make sense just to change the agenda, Julie, to have your housing activities update now and then save the full discussion when Brian arrives?
Sure, yeah.
Is that amenable to everyone? Just take the housing activities update first?
Sure.
Okay.
And I do have a question. The gentleman, you're taking movies?
I'm taking video, public, for the public record.
And who's
It's gonna go,
And could you state your name?
My name is Bruce Tanner, I'm just a concerned citizen.
Okay, great.
So it's up on my YouTube channel.
Oh, great. Appreciate it.
I'm not sure how many viewers you're gonna get for this, but go for it, Bruce.
Well, we send out links to people who are interested, so.
Sweet. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so Julie will take that.
Yeah, and I'm going to try not to take too much time because we have a really exciting show here today. And I know that you all, at the last meeting, had a chance to meet Suzanne. I was not here. So I would have to say the most significant thing we have going on in our section is that we have new staff, and we are so delighted to have Suzanne Issei with us. She's been really helpful, especially on our near-term housing amendments, some of which we'll be talking about today. So I didn't get a chance to personally welcome her here to all of you. And it's been great. It feels like we're really able to take up some things that we've been so stymied by being short-staffed. So as you all know this, as well as anyone, how we've been kind of pushing a rock a little bit bigger than the ants behind it. I don't know if that's a metaphor or not. Yes.
Joy, I just wanted to say I was really pleased when I walked in the room and saw Suzanne, because when I was an interim planning director, which happened 3 times, a few years back, I had an opportunity to work with Suzanne. She was fantastic. And when she left Capitol, we all, oh no.
What are you gonna do? So you know.
This is terrific. Yeah, it's really
Yeah, it's
great
been-
to have somebody who you really do appreciate, and you know that everybody will,
Yeah.
as they learn more about who she is and what she's about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that the hack is going to really
Good
be
choice.
seeing a lot of the benefits. Yeah, it felt like a score, I gotta say.
Yes.
So I am going to, like I said, go fairly quickly, but one of the things I really want to let you know about, and here comes our quorum, right? Walk out the door. Hi, Brian. Is that there, as you all know, the HAC plays a role as the first hearing body for community development block grant funding. The county is a state applicant for this very important source of federal money. And it is on a state level, the CDBG program has been going through a lot of changes and doing program rewrites and responding to fires, and it's been really difficult to know if and when there's going to be a NOFA this year. You might remember that there is a rule, a 50% expenditure rule for eligibility that it makes it important for us to be really strategic about when we apply. So we have informal intel. It's not yet posted on the website, but we've heard it from staff at HCD that they are in fact planning on issuing a NOFA in September. Ordinarily,
This month?
yeah, this September, yes, the month that we are now in. And we went to great lengths to establish a CDBG schedule, and that formally has your commission serving as the hearing body for the first public hearing, and to have it be not in a big crisis and rush. And then the state has, ever since we set up that process, has been changing their timelines and rules. So there is a chance that we will be pursuing this in a rush with not quite enough time to meet all of the deadlines in order to submit an application. So this is really a heads up. I hope that this doesn't happen, but one scenario is that they actually issue this thing, and we can't have you serving as the hearing body at your regularly scheduled November meeting, and that we would have to try to pull together a special meeting in order for you to serve that role as the notice
Do
public
you think
hearing.
it's like October or December?
You know, they said,
No,
they said September. And so if it was the end of September and then they still get to say, yep, okay, we made it in September, that might push us out to allow us to do our community outreach, which, and it's all very programmed, what it is we need to do, as you know. And that we would then, at the November meeting, that would be the first public hearing. We will keep you posted. I hope that's how it actually ends up going. But I thought, because it will cause a bit of a stir should it occur, that we should give you a heads up. So that's that. I also wanted to let you know, I know that commissioners are all aware that the housing section of the planning department is the lead agency for the homeless continuum of care, what we call locally the Homeless Action Partnership. There's a lot of changes going on a county level about how we organize ourselves around homelessness, and those changes are very much continuing with, the CAO's office being very involved. But we do continue to play that role, and there are a couple of important funding sources that are just coming up right now that all require participation of the continuum of care, or the COC. So those include there's about $9 million in what they call HEAP. And then the other one is called CASH. Let me see if I can remember these acronyms. And the third one is called No Place Like Home. So we are closely working with the CAO's office to define a process to respond very, very quickly to these funding opportunities. The cash is primarily for additional services for people who are homeless. HEAP is mostly for, they're hoping to be for facilities. And that's a larger pot of money. You might also have noted that in the local housing bond also targets some money for homeless facilities. That one will not go through the COC. But so HEAP and cash directly tied to a COC approval process, and also No Place Like Home. That one is reusing Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63 money that is very specifically for housing and for the construction of new housing units, either set aside within a larger project, which can be used and actually count as tiebreaker money. And then it could also be used to purchase single-family homes for shared housing. So those are all, it's a lot of money, and it's happening so much faster than usual, contrast with CDBG, which I guess is also happening quickly this year. That one can be a little slow and ponderous. So I wanted you all to know that's going on. I don't anticipate a role for your commission. Other than that, we try to keep you informed on sort of the hot button housing issues that are going on. And our section is directly working with behavioral health on No Place Like Home. So that's that piece. Two quick updates on projects that are underway. One of them is the Habitat project on Harper. And that project is just responding, we're doing final comments for in its second routing. We are hoping that we're going to be seeing that at PC before too long. We're hoping to get to the board in December. And at the board, it will be the approval of the project as it's proposed, approval of the environmental review documents, and also, as a separate item, probably the approval of the Affordable Housing Property Disposition Agreement, which is the piece that we are most directly involved in. I guess we're involved in all of it, but because it will be the county's participating as a land donation. So, yes.
What is the project?
So the project is proposed to be a 11-unit affordable housing habitat homeownership project on Harper Street. It's twin homes, I guess they're often called. It's, you know, side-by-side homes with one exception. It's on a really nice property that the redevelopment agency purchased in the 1990s. So that project is moving along.
Are they also doing ADUs in addition?
No.
They're not, okay.
Early on, they had thought they might, but no, there will be no ADUs. And then finally, I just wanted to give you a quick update on 17th and Capitola. I know Dean's been to, I think, all of the public meetings, so you could probably give a better update than I can. So that project is also moving along, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's also a property that the redevelopment agency purchased many years ago in the hopes of really developing the corner of 17th and Capitola Road to serve a real function as sort of a heart of Live Oak kind of a thing. And of course, the demise of redevelopment has changed the look of that project, but Mid-Penn Housing was selected as the preferred developer and they're developing the whole thing, and they're partnering with Dientis and with the Live Oak Family Health Centers. So there'll be a clinic as well as a dental facility on site. So the last I heard, they are hoping for an October submittal and moving right along on that one.
And they have a community meeting coming up.
They do, and I'm not sure the date of it, thank you.
9?
I'm not sure the date
Yeah,
of
I'm
that.
not sure either.
Sorry, the last time I heard they hadn't landed on it.
They have a date, and I was told last night, I forgot.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't remember the exact date.
And type of units, the number of units?
So that's moving around a little bit, but it's in the neighborhood of 60 affordable rental units. So it's multifamily with an emphasis on family housing, workforce housing, you know, right there on the transportation corridor. But the exact number of units, I wouldn't quote me on that right now because it's still sliding around, subject to review. Then finally, I just want to let you know, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne to do the presentation on the some of the updates that in response to our June meeting, the HAC's June meeting on near-term housing actions. And those are, so she's got a very thorough presentation on a number of those. A couple of the activities were separated out because they're going to have a slightly different process. So we're still working on them as quickly as we can. We expect to see action in the fall. And those are the farm worker housing amendments and the what we call PRH, permanent room housing. So those two are going to be code amendments on a slightly different time frame, but still moving as quickly as we can. So that's it. That's what I got.
And what's the story on public facility? That appears to have fallen into category.
That's what this is.
I'll go into that. in the
Great.
presentation.
Yeah, it didn't fall out, it merged, would be a better way to put it.
Okay, I read the August 22 letter that made it sound like it had fallen out.
Yeah,
Great.
it morphed. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne, unless there's more questions.
You need to start the item.
Wait, did you want to go back to the consent?
I do,
agenda?
yeah. I want to make sure we don't forget to approve the minutes. So thank you, Julie, for all that. That was great. So heading back to the minutes.
I move approval of the minutes.
Second. You. All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone no or abstain? That passes 6-0. Okay, now we're going to move on to our one general scheduled business item today, and that's the public hearing for the first set of near-term code amendments to support affordable housing. And Suzanne, you're going to give us a report.
Yes, so I don't know if everyone wanted a paper copy of the report on this item. The majority of pages in that packet are a copy of what went to the Planning Commission on August 22nd. They were supposed to be the first commission to consider this, and then the HAC would have been the second. However, now the action will be occurring in reverse because they continued it to their September meeting, which is going to happen on the 26th. So you all will actually be making your recommendation prior to them. I don't think that it really matters either way because you're kind of recommending on different aspects of it.
And just to note, there were
Yeah.
2 commissioners that weren't present that day, so
Right.
that kind of affected their ability to have good discourse.
So just briefly, for members of the public who may not be fully familiar with this item, there were a number of suggestions made both by members of the public as well as this commission, I think dating back into the spring, I believe, but it kind of culminated at the HAC's May meeting. And there was a list of recommendations that was forwarded from there to the June 12th Board of Supervisors meeting. And I used that board letter to help me quite a bit to prepare the letter to the Planning Commission because I was not working here at that time. So basically there was a list of, I think, 6 or 7 initiatives that were highlighted in that June board meeting that was kind of our, main task that we were trying to address. And then there was a second, or not a second, but an additional item that had been discussed, I believe, at a prior set of meetings a little bit earlier. That was the item that we are including here, which is number 3 on the list on the first page of this memo, which is essentially the item that's been discussed about as the developer choice issue with respect to the Measure J inclusionary requirements. So that's also on this list. So we got together, the long-range planners and our assistant director and director, and kind of went through this list and figured out, okay, how soon can we process these various recommendations? And we essentially wound up sorting them into kind of 3 piles. So this is the first set. The second set we're calling the midterm, because these are the near term. So the second set is the midterm set of initiatives that we're going to be bringing forward. That includes the farm worker, modifications to the farm worker code sections, the permanent room housing, as well as we're adding in, although I think it was coming from a different list, or I'm not quite sure of the history of that, but the public facilities, some suggestions around that. So those 3 things, we're hoping to be able to bring some recommendations to the same 3 bodies, essentially starting perhaps in January. It might be December, but I believe it's more like January.
So we're not doing any public facility issue today?
Not today, no. And the main reason for that was they required a little bit more long-term timelines in terms of noticing and things like that, tribal consultation, things that go along with environmental review. So we couldn't bring them as part of this set. And
So it was CEQA driven to knock the public facility out?
It's not so much that one, it was more the farm worker changes and the PRH that required, because our general plan language is very specific and some of the suggestions would require a little bit of modification of some of that general plan language. And anytime you modify the general plan, you have to do what's called a tribal consultation letter, which is a required 90-day notice period to the tribes. And that's what kind of pushed it from being...
We can't change the general plan on non-tribal lands because a tribal consultation is required?
That's correct. It's OPR, it's just the basic stuff.
Oh, no wonder we never get anywhere.
Yeah, and I've just dealt with that, a big project I've had in Monterey for years, and all of a sudden they adopted about a year ago this issue of having a tribal representative to be hired by the applicant to be on site during construction if there was any archaeological sites. Well, we hired Bershini Associates. They said, there is a site, but it's not ever been dug up. It's probably part of an old kitchen midden, and there's probably nothing there. And Nevertheless, the county said, guess what? As a condition of approval, you have to have this tribal guy there, which gets to be very expensive. So it seems kind of odd. I think, having to look at a general plan issue, and it's not, we're not really talking about the environmental analysis, why we would need to.
Well, this isn't about,
delay it.
with this midterm package, and I don't want to get too far into that because that's
Sure.
not what we noticed. But just to answer your question, it's not quite the same situation as what you're talking about. We're not talking about any actual project. We're just talking about changing some language in our general plan. And OPR, I guess, part of the new general plan guidelines and the CEQA guidelines for amending general plans in general is you have to have this 90-day consultation period.
Oh, okay.
Anytime it has nothing to do with anything on the ground because there's no sites
Thanks for
involved.
explaining that.
Yeah. So it's just a standard thing, and it just really is stemming from the fact that in the case of this county, the general plan language is extremely specific. So even though these initiatives sound like they're pretty modest changes to actual, land use policy, it's because the general plan language is extremely prescriptive and it kind of boxes us in that it would actually require a general plan amendment potentially to implement some of these changes, whereas initially I think they thought it was just a zoning amendment, which wouldn't require that 90-day noticing period. So it's kind of a technicality, but it just pushes our time frame out.
And was it county council or senior staff who decided that?
All of us together, yeah. And this is a standard requirement. I mean, you go to any jurisdiction, it's kind of like, okay, that's just how it's done these days. That's what you have to do when you're amending it.
Just as a point of process, gentlemen, I'd like to let Suzanne just sort of get through her presentation because I know she has a lot to present, and then we can ask all of these questions and make comments when she's finished, if that's all right.
Yeah, so, and just to sum up there, so we'll be coming back in a few months with that second set. So it's by no means the staff's intention to slow this down. It's just, the law is what it is. You have to do what you have to do. So that's where we are. But that gives us more time to focus on this first set and make sure everybody's understanding what we're proposing and see what folks think about it. So we did some analysis on these suggestions, and I'm going to present to you here kind of what we've come up with in terms of code amendments. Just to sum up before I go through the presentation, the 3 items we're trying to recommend here is, number 1, the enhanced density bonus option, which was proposed earlier this year. You get a twofer on that one because by doing that, we also come up with a solution to, not in every case, but in many cases, the constraint around mixed-use proposals. And I'll go into that a little bit more when I get to that section of the presentation. The second one is the proposal to change a little bit of the procedural requirements for the R combining district. So for folks who aren't familiar with that, that is an overlay district that allows housing at up to 20 units an acre, which is a little bit higher than the otherwise high density designation, which allows up to 17.4 units an acre. So I'll go into that as well. And then the third thing is relating to the county's inclusionary program known as Measure J. This has to do with the developers that have a project of 7 or more new homes for sale. Currently, it's their sole option whether they want to pay fees to take care of that obligation or provide affordable units. There's been a discussion for a few years now about, they should have to get county approval to pay the in lieu fee rather than provide the affordable units. That's how it was for many, many years here, and that was changed in 2015 to allow the developers to choose. This recommendation would put it back the way it was prior to 2015. And just want to clarify on that. It is, in terms of the way the code is set up now for approval of any alternatives to on-site affordable units for those types of projects, it is what's called the approving body, which means it's either the planning commission or the board. It's not always necessarily the board that would make that approval. Now, in practical terms, probably in most cases, it probably will be the board because if it's 20 or more units, generally those projects are going to the board. But the initiative that was proposed originally, they had just used the term Board of Supervisors approval, but we made our modifications consistent with what the code already had for the other types of alternatives, which is the approving body. So let's launch into this. These are the three initiatives we're talking about. So each one involved different chapters of the county's code. So these chapters are noted here. So as we launched into trying to work on these code amendments, and I worked very closely with county council on these, and then also with our planning staff in this department, we realized that although the county's code, which is chapter 1712, had been updated relatively recently in 2015, there was a lot of legislative activity in 2016, which meant that the county's code is no longer consistent with state law. So there was a number of kind of text amendments that we had to make just to bring it up to where state law is. And one of the reasons for that is something that is somewhat unique in the state law on density bonus, which is, it is very prescriptive, and it says that if the local ordinance is out of sync with the state law prevails regardless. So it's really to your advantage. It's better to bring your code up to consistency with the state law, because you don't want to create confusion with people looking at one thing that's really out of date, and they wouldn't know that just looking at it. So we've included in this proposed ordinance a lot of text amendments that are just literally copying verbatim the stuff we need to be consistent with state law. So the majority of the actual text changes in that chapter that we're proposing are just to achieve that state consistency. The density bonus option is really just consolidated primarily into one little section that's new to the code. All of that, by the way, is contained in this attachment 2, starting on the pages that are labeled Exhibit C. So if you wanted to kind of take a look at all the details, it starts on the 9th page of this packet here. So the next initiative, and I will go into the density bonus materials in more depth after these next 2 slides. This is the R Combining District, Regional Housing Combining District. The main thing, what we were trying to achieve here was pretty much exactly what was proposed in those earlier meetings, which was to allow people other than the Board of Supervisors to propose sites for inclusion in this district. And generally speaking, that in most cases would be either the property owner or maybe an applicant that's got some sort of arrangement with the property owner. But in any case, you would need the property owner's consent. So currently, the process is kind of unclear. There's been several changes to the code since 2007 dealing with this district. So in this case as well, we also found some items that were just cleanup items where there had been some amendments made, I believe, in 2015, and there were a few pieces of that should have been struck in 2015 that weren't, that were just kind of almost clerical errors. So we're cleaning up some of that here as well. But the main idea is we clarified the process so that there's a new process that's available to outside parties, anyone other than the Planning Commission or the board. And what it is essentially it would work kind of like a consultation with the Planning Commission. It's not a binding process. So somebody would file basically a pretty simple application that just says, hey, here's a property. We think you should consider adding the R Combining Overlay Zone to it. That goes to the Planning Commission, public hearing. They would either choose to adopt a resolution or not adopt a resolution. The resolution is a resolution to study the concept of that site being added into the overlay zone. It doesn't bind the commissioners to later approve that rezoning application. So in that.
Does it bind the owner to stick with
No,
it?
it doesn't bind anybody.
Doesn't bind anybody, good.
It's kind of a test the water, stick your little toe in the water to see if it's warm enough.
That's
kind of
exactly
thing.
how property owners feel.
Yeah.
That's very intelligent.
So it's like a consultation, basically. So they would come in, file this sort of quick application, the public would be notified, planning commission would consider it. Whatever the decision they make is appealable to the board. The board would be able to consider it as well if it was appealed to them. Either way, if it was a positive indication, if they did adopt the resolution to study this idea, then whoever proposed this change, the applicant would then have to go back and undertake all the preliminary, pre-development studies, phase 1 soils analysis, all that kind of thing. Prepare an application to rezone, to add the overlay district. In some cases, it may also require a general plan change if the underlying general plan designation is not residential, medium, or high. They might have to do a general plan amendment as well. And then they would also have to prepare a PUD, planned unit development application. So this is going to be a big, costly, time-consuming application, in-depth CEQA analysis. So it's a big lift for the applicant, and that's why having this sort of preliminary consultation would be helpful.
So we're really, do I understand that then that all we're doing is essentially getting the property owner an early reading about what the current politically appointed body thinks of the idea, but they have the same delays, the same expenses, the same hoops to jump through. Is that as yesterday?
For that formal application, yes, we didn't change anything with the formal application process to rezone and whatever else might be entailed. So we're just adding a preliminary step that previously didn't exist.
And the preliminary step, just all that it gets them is a vote from the planning commission that says, yeah, we think this has some merit.
Essentially. It does give them a little more than that in that there's some public exposure of the idea, and so if there was some concerned members of the public, they might find out their feelings at that point. If the board, if it was appealed to the board either way, let's say the planning commission says no, and that gets appealed by the applicant or vice versa, you would get the board's read on it. So you're going to get various levels of input, let's say, on your idea. But in terms of being an actual land use action or a rezoning action, it is not that. All of that still remains in place that the applicant would have to go through.
During this first phase, as you just described, and following up on that, would the applicant have to submit traffic studies, geotechnical studies, soil samples, perhaps water studies, etc.?
Not for the preliminary step. All of that is in the rezoning application. And so in reality, it's likely that there would be a significant time lapse between the preliminary kind of test the waters process until they actually can complete all those studies and get the formal application. And it might be a year, it might be 2 years, we just don't know. It'll depend somewhat on the applicant, also on the site, what kind of issues are involved. So
in effect, Julie, pardon me, I don't mean to, I just want to understand the parameters of what we're getting out of this. And Julie, is this like the old PDSR, the pre-development site review that we used to have for certain, regular projects? Come in and, wave your finger and see which way the wind's liable to blow with staff and with the...
This actually brings it in front of an approving body, in front of the planning commission. And so it provides very public opportunity to, one of the ways that I would look at it, and maybe some of the developers in the room might agree with this, is the county cannot act on anything prior to, formally prior to environmental review. What this gives a developer or property owner a chance to get is a big loud no. That's how I would look at it if I was trying to develop a piece of property.
Not spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right, before spending, because as you know, the it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars to prepare all of the studies and design work that you need in order to go forward. And so you're not going to you can't take this to the bank, but you're going to have a better idea of where you stand. And the idea of this is to make this resource of a 20-unit per acre property more available, other than just the board coming down from on high and saying that one. So it would give, Eden Housing, for instance, if they thought they had a good opportunity, pardon me for picking on you, an opportunity to say, we've got this site and we know it's going to be tricky because if it's not developed, if it was easy, it already would be. And so, to sort of find out what some issues are.
Well, I love that phrase that you just used. If it was easy, it already would be. Because that's where we find ourselves right now. And I don't hear us proposing anything that makes it any easier.
Well, this is intended to be, it's certainly, within the confines of what we are legally restricted from doing. What this is intended to do is to make it, make this tool, meaning the density at the R Combining District, and along with all of the other pieces that are part of that, something that could be proposed by a property owner or developer.
And I think that's a piece that it does open the door to other properties, because the 2007, as it was written, was a finite, if I remember right, a finite list of properties.
Sites, yeah.
Very
Where
specific.
it was specific to certain APN numbers.
Yeah,
This
they
opens it up
mostly just developed at
to
this
anybody
point.
else can step forward now
Yeah.
and ask for this sort of zoning.
And quite frankly, this is exactly what we were asked to do. So this is what was described in that earlier board letter, is give other property owners, interested applicants, a way to propose sites other than that list of 5, of which I think 4 have already been built out.
It was 6.
Or
but
whatever,
we lost one.
a small number under 10, let's put it that way, single digits. To have some sort of way to propose sites for consideration. It wasn't intended to be give them the rezone, and we can't without going through the CEQA process, which is the costly part of the thing. So that's what we were trying to provide here.
And just to follow up on that, if the planning commission says, no, we're not interested in this study, is that appealable to the board?
Yes, either way it's appealed, yes or no.
Okay, but
Both sides
it
are
doesn't have to go to the coastal commission at this point.
Nothing would have to go until anything that might impact the coastal zone. First of all, we don't know if the site's in the coastal zone or not. Yeah. So that's that.
Thank you.
And I believe there will be more detailed discussion of this at the next planning commission meeting, so you may want to follow that as well. And so this third item here is, as I mentioned, kind of what's been called the developer choice issue. It's a little more succinct. It only involves a few little minor changes to Chapter 1710. And again, it's following up on the proposal that was brought forward earlier this year. So it's really 2 things. One is saying that applicants with a Measure J project, as we call them, would need either planning commission or board approval if they want to pay in lieu fees rather than put the affordable units on site. And the second thing, it's kind of, okay, a trade-off. We're kind of taking away a little bit of your range of choices, at least putting an approval layer in there. But on the other hand, we'll defer the timing of payment for whatever fees you're going to have to pay if you are paying any impact fees on your project, which was another thing that was requested earlier this year. So you wouldn't have to pay them until you're getting your final inspection occupancy certificate. They have to be around the same time, which a lot of developers have asked for over the years, and it really helps them so they're not paying interest on a construction loan for the fee payment. So we felt like, okay, that should be a kind of fair trade-off there. But we're obviously looking for feedback from anybody who's interested in providing it on that.
Excuse me, when you say planning commission or board of supervisors, what do you mean by that?
So it's the project size generally that determines what the final approving body is for that development entitlement package. So I think it's 20 units or more goes to the board.
and 19 or fewer, it's planning commission. Of course, if it's a smaller project, but it gets appealed up to the board, then it would be the board. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the enhanced density bonus option that we've developed because it's a little complicated, but before we launch into that, as we were all working on this presentation, we thought it might be nice to just kind of review some photos of like what actual different densities look like. So who thinks they can guess all the answers right? Okay, whoever has better eyesight, because I actually put the answers on the slide, so who has good eyesight will guess them first. All right, here we go. But should know this one. This is the famous Venetians in Capitola, first subdivision made in California, if you didn't already know. Launches in at about 65 units an acre. It was kind of hard to calculate. I
And
just
with
used our
climate
GI.
change,
Maybe underwater. Yeah. So there you go. This one is Lotus Apartments. I believe we gave them some rehab assistance at a certain point.
Yeah, no, that was funded with MHSA redevelopment dollars.
Yeah, I mined our shared drive here for some of these photos, so that's how we came up with that one. So that one is actually 33 units an acre, primarily because they're small units and there's not a lot of extra open space on the site. This is a project from Charities Housing. They're based over in the South Bay. And this is a senior project, and it was recently built, and it's at 57 units an acre. It's, you know, with senior projects, typically it's mostly one bedrooms, sometimes studios. You might have a couple, 2 or 3 two bedrooms in there. So obviously you can get a lot more units in a smaller shell of a building. This is another one locally, Bromer Street, 13 units an acre. Again, this one probably predated our local zoning code. Jane's shaking her head. Was not selected for aesthetic appeal. It was just because we had those lines. I think we did a rehab on this one too.
Yeah.
Some folks might remember this one. This is the farm. This one has actually won a lot of design awards. I believe we have some in the hallway right here. This is actually a multi-family development, but it was only about 10 units an acre, primarily because it's a large parcel. There's a lot of open space, so when you average it over all that space, it winds up being a pretty low density.
but we lost the farm.
Yeah. I used to work there.
I blame Tom Burns for that, I guess.
Actually,
It's before I came to
that
work.
piece is still vacant. It was supposed to be a park, and it's never been developed.
It's still owned by the county.
Okay, there's a story there. We'll find out what's going on. All right. So when we were trying to develop this option, we realized as we were kind of analyzing, you know, what would work and so forth, partly because we're building off of the state law. So under state law, the state keeps adding kind of new flavors of density bonus for different types of special projects or scenarios. We didn't try to work with every single variation that the state has. Most of those are not used very often, but we tried to look at what are the types of projects that are where they most often will request a density bonus, and particularly in this jurisdiction, what types of projects are we most likely to see that would qualify for a density bonus and possibly be interested in applying for a density bonus or an expanded density bonus. So we narrowed it down to essentially these 3 project types. So in short, the 100% affordable projects, those are typically the ones, in most cases, that the county is actually assisting. Either we're maybe providing the land, or maybe we're providing a loan of county funds, or both. So typically it's your nonprofit housing developer, maybe it's a tax credit project, maybe it's a senior project, whatever, but there's typically a county role in those, and they typically need all the help they can get. So we were trying to see, you know, what can be done with those. The other 2 are generally projects on the for sale side, most typically would be the ones that are subject to the mandatory inclusionary housing requirements. So it's your 7 or more for sale project where they might have a Measure J home in the mix on the side. or maybe more than one, depending on the size of the project. On the rental side, these are projects, we don't currently have a mandatory inclusionary requirement for rentals, but in the state density bonus law, they actually provide the biggest amount of bonus to market rate rental, or typically market rate rental projects that agree voluntarily to provide a certain number of lower income rental units within their project. So typically these are market rate projects. The way the state law works is you get the most bonus if you do very low income units. So you get double the amount of bonus for one very low income unit as you do for one low income unit. And the state distinguishes between rental projects and for sale projects in that they say if you're doing a density bonus on a rental project, you only have 2 income levels to choose from, very low or low. On a for sale project, you can do mod. You could do low, but the state doesn't really address it that much. It's assumed that you're going to do moderate income units on a for sale project, which is great because it lines up nicely with our Measure J program. So that's kind of the conceptual framework. Any questions on that before I launch into more detail? Nope. Okay. So here's an example. We'll start with the mixed income rental projects. Let's say you have an acre site. It's zoned urban high. The zoning parameters are, for every 2,500 square feet you have on your site, you can get 1 unit. That translates to 17.4 units an acre. That's what's referred to in the density bonus world as your base density. In the state density bonus law, it says whenever you're doing any of these density calculations, if you have a fractional unit, you always round up to the next whole unit, even if the fraction is less than half. That's just the way it is. So we have to be consistent with that. So that means for this 1 acre site, their base density, their base project that they could build would be 18 units an acre. If they wanted to just work within the existing state law, existing chapter 1712, if they wanted to max out the maximum amount of density bonus they could get currently, you could do that by providing 11% of your units, your base density units, as very low income units. That equates to 2 units in this particular project, and that would get you a 35% density bonus. That equals 7 units, so now you're at a 25 unit project. If you want to build up all of those units, density winds up being about 25 units an acre. Now, one thing I will note is that I've worked on these projects in other jurisdictions, and they don't always necessarily max out the bonus unit. They might say, oh, well, for whatever the uniqueness of our site, we can't get those last 2 bonus units in, but we still want to do the density bonus because they get other perks. They get reduced parking standards. They can get other things called incentives and concessions. That would be things like maybe a little wiggle room on the setbacks or the height, or various other zoning development standards. What we are proposing to do for the enhanced bonus is essentially, if we took the mathematical formula that's used in the state law and just plotted it out on a graph and kept it going at the same angle, what you call like a straight line projection, that's how we came up with the enhanced bonus for this type of project. So we just keep that straight line going. So we extended it until we hit a 50% bonus, right? So the state maxes out at 35, we're looking at going to 50%. So now they would have to provide 4 very low income units if they wanted to hit the full max under the enhanced program, 17% of their units. That would get them 9 bonus units and get them up to 27 units an acre. Now, if we're trying to be inside the developer's head and going, is anyone going to do this with a market rate project? Is it worth that trade-off? You're losing 2 market rate units. I don't know. Either bonus adds a net of 5 market rate units in this scenario, right? Because you've got 7 bonus minus 2 very low, that's 5. 9 bonus minus 4 very low, that's 5. They're still at a total number of units in total that's larger than they started with. We don't know. It's really going to depend on the site, the acreage, the whatever kind of project the developer's trying to build. I would say it's like, maybe, right? If it's a nonprofit developer, they would probably go for this, right? Because they're usually doing 100% affordable. They've got plenty of very low units. But this is not the nonprofit program anyway, so I'll get to that in a minute.
Suzanne, a question, because I thought, and this may be incorrect, that high density isn't it RM 1.5 or 1,500?
There
square
is
feet?
another zone district in the county that's RM 1.5.
Because that's doubles it practically. Those numbers makes it 2,800 square feet per unit.
Which number?
The 17.4 divided into 43,560 is about 2,800.
It's a little over 2,500.
Okay.
So these are existing general plan and zoning districts that the county has.
So this is not RM 1.5 then?
No, because that's not, we wanted to pick an actual general plan designation, and currently there is no general plan designation that's 1.5. Or actually, it might be, is it they are combining? I don't think there is. I mean, I don't know. We have two properties. We have two properties.
They're definitely. No, it's in the county. RM 1.5, that's the zone.
That's the zone. It's not a general plan land use designation.
Sure, but I thought it was.
So we'll have an opportunity.
Yeah, we'll get back to you.
Members of
on
the
that.
public to ask questions and have comments as soon as we get through the presentation.
So anyway, that's kind of the scenario we're proposing, and I have a graph at the end of my slideshow. I can show you if you want to see the straight line projection, if there's any math fans in the audience. All right, so we wanted to show you some examples of projects that are at similar densities. So just to go back, we're looking at the base density, it's 18 units an acre. The next level would be what's under the current law, current code would get you to 25 units an acre on this site, and the enhanced bonus we're talking about would be 27. So for 18 units, the closest example I could find in our files was Eden Housing Project, which is at 19 units an acre. Close enough, 18, 19, it's going to look about the same. The main difference there is going to be, again, how much open space is in the parcel, you know, when you're running these calculations. So that's what that looks like. I couldn't find anything right at 25, but this is 22.4 units an acre. You all may remember this project that just opened about a year or two ago, I think, St. Stephen's in Live Oak, 22.4.
Do you remember that one?
And then this one, I had to go outside the county to find this example. This is a Midland project from Half Moon Bay. It's a senior project, and it's 27 units an acre. So our next type of project for the enhanced bonus is, like I mentioned, kind of your for sale Measure J project, where it's 7 units or more, subject to the Chapter 1710. So for this site, we're looking at a site that's just under 1.3 acres. The zoning district is R14, that's 4,000, roughly 4,000 square foot lots. General plan designation is urban medium. That's a range of 7.2 to 10.8 units an acre. Now, another nuance in the density bonus law I forgot to mention on the first slide is the state law says whenever there's a range indicated like that, for the purpose of calculating the density for a density bonus application, you have to go with the top of the range. And if there's any conflict between the zoning, the density in the zoning district and what's in the general plan prevails. So just good to know. So the base density for this site equates to about 14 units an acre. So with rounding, it's exactly 14 units. That's their base project. So currently, if they don't apply for any bonus at all, but they're subject to our inclusionary requirements, they've got to provide 2 moderate income units, right? And they may have a little bit of a fractional fee payment requirement because it's not exactly 2. But they have that option. They can pay the fractional fee. So that winds up equaling 10.8 units an acre because they didn't ask for any density bonus, they're not getting one. They still have to provide 2 market rate units. So out of their 14 units, they've got 2 affordable, 12 market rate. If they wanted to apply for a density bonus currently, they'd have to provide 3 moderate income units, because if there's a fraction, you round up to the next whole unit. They would get 3 bonus units. The total project would wind up being about 13 units an acre. But it's kind of a wash from a financial perspective, right? Because they're getting 3 market rate units, but they're giving up 3 market rate units. So net, they're at the same number of market rate units as when they started. That may explain why a lot of developers are not applying for the bonus currently, right? Part of this is that if you look at the state density bonus law, you'll notice on a unit per unit basis, they don't give a lot of bonus to moderate income units. You can tell that from a policy strategy, they were really trying to incentivize more developers to provide more very low income units, because they get a lot more bonus per very low unit than they do for low or mod. So what we're looking at for the enhanced bonus program, we're thinking, okay, well, in this county, we know we have projects that are subject to Measure J. Those projects may be at a point where they're just not financially feasible, particularly on the smaller sites, on the lower densities. They're just not going to happen, period, with the Measure J requirements in certain cases. If they're not getting any bonus and the state is really not providing enough bonus to overcome that initial cost of providing the Measure J's, right? It's a wash. Provide 3, get 3. You're still at the same number of market rates. So maybe if we can give a little more bonus to those projects, we'd allow more of those to be financially feasible. We'd see more of those projects. And also, maybe it'll help a little bit with getting rid of the developer choice. So again, kind of give them a little perk for taking away the developer choice. So what we said is, okay, we're going to be a little more generous than the state law for the same amount of units. However, our program is a little more rigorous than the state law in that with Measure J units, the restriction is in perpetuity. With the state program, it's a equity sharing arrangement if there's no local requirement in place. There are some higher standards that we put in that the state density bonus doesn't carry, so it makes sense that we would give them a little more bonus than the state does. We also have some more rigorous standards with unit siting and finishes and all that kind of thing. The state is kind of silent on most of those details. So that's what we're proposing there. And in this case, it would get someone on this site up to about 16 units an acre. So let's look at some pictures. This is a property in Capitola again. This is a single family project. It was a 10-unit lot split in the middle of a mixed neighborhood, residential neighborhood of various densities. And single family homes at a little over 10 units an acre. This is Parkhurst Terrace. This is again one of the county affordable housing properties, mid-Penn, out in Aptos, and it wound up being about 12 units an acre, so slightly higher density. So you see in going from 10 to 12, in most cases, particularly with market rate projects, once you get much over 10 or 11 units or an acre, you're pretty much having to go to some attached units. Maybe that not all the units on the site are attached, but you might have a few duets and a few separate single-family units. As you start going higher than 12, you're pretty much going to look at more of a townhome product type. Oops, I went the wrong way. So these are probably a little bit more tall than what you would normally see, but this was 15 units an acre. This is another project from Half Moon Bay. This was just the closest example I could find to 16 units an acre. Typically, you're in a market rate project. It's a market rate for sale project, and that developer really only wants to build for sale homes. They may not build out every single bonus unit they get, but again, it could be to their advantage to applying for the bonus because they get some of those additional perks that essentially can make some of the site standards a little more feasible for the project. Like the slightly reduced parking standards, the incentives and concessions and so forth. So even though they might be able theoretically to get up to 16 units an acre on a site, if they really don't want to build townhomes, if they really are, their thing is they only build single family, they might put in the density bonus application just to get some of those other benefits. but maybe they're only going to build out 12 or 13 homes, so we don't know what a market rate developer will really do, but we thought it wouldn't hurt to give them this option to have this enhanced bonus. And maybe if some developers are more used to building townhomes or duets and things like that, that this would be helpful for them. And we get more of the Measure J units out of the project. So the next group of, or the next project type is the 100% affordable. So most of you are probably familiar with a lot of the projects the county's assisted recently in Aptos in South County, Live Oak. On this example, we've got an acre site. For the example, we're using the R combining district overlay. So it's 20 units an acre. There's no range, it's just 20, that's it. So it makes the math very simple here. Your base project is 20 units. Because the developer is doing an affordable project, let's say it's 50% low, 50% very low. So they've got, 50% very low units. So under the state density bonus program, they're still capped at a 35% bonus, even though you only need to provide 11% of your units as very low to get the 35% bonus. These guys are providing, let's say, 50% very low, way exceeding the requirement. They still, under state law, wouldn't get any more than the 7 bonus units. So that'll help. It gets them to 27 units an acre. But we thought they're really going so far above and beyond what the state requirement is for that 35% bonus. It would be nice if we could give them a little bit more bonus. So we're proposing to go higher than we did on the market rate projects, go up to 75% bonus. However, we have written into the proposed amendments ultimate kind of overriding cap for all of these programs, which is the density in no case cannot exceed 30 units an acre. Yes.
What is the origin of that 30?
It came out of some of our group discussions. I don't remember exactly.
Are you saying why did we bump up against the cap? Why did we?
Where did that number come from?
So really a lot of it is this is a big step for us as a county to go to a density. I realize that in the city and urban areas it is not, but for a county density in this county, 30 units per acre is, the highest we've done before has been 20, with a couple of exceptions of the legacy projects, the older projects. So it really just came about as proposing it at 75%, but reaching a limit, because it could possibly go higher than that.
It could, like in this example, it would have gone over if we didn't have that cap.
And we just, so what we're looking for is a way to very strategically target additional density, and particularly we hope we are continuing to incentivize the smaller units that we know we need so badly in our market. So it was just what we thought we were going to be able to.
I think it did also line up, I may not have all the details on this, but when we were discussing the longer term effort that the long range planning staff is working on with the longer
sustainability update,
general plan update, code update, and so forth. I think they have a potential district maybe that's about that range.
Came up to 30.
Yeah, so we were trying to be consistent with that longer range objective as well.
What comes to my mind is that I hear it takes at least 40 units to make a project to work, and we don't have many parcels that are bigger than an acre. So I don't see how this is going to help us.
Well, we actually do. For most of the projects that are going to be a project of this type, they are going to be on sites that are bigger than an acre. And it's true that a lot of the infill are going to be that small, but the projects that we've looked at, for instance, when we did the R combining district, we had a minimum parcel size of 2 acres.
But we had to search very hard to find those parcels.
We know where they are. They're identified in our housing element. We do know where the sites are. And then there's also the potential to bundle sites. I mean, I certainly hear your point, but, and Suzanne is right, it is part of the, and all of this work, by the way, is part of the overall, we're pulling the housing specific and especially affordable housing specific out of the sustainability update. And in order to take them on sooner. But of course, we're very cognizant of that effort and wanting to stay consistent with it because we're trying to untangle rather than add tangles to this process.
Yeah. And that's something when you get into your discussion, I mean, you can certainly think about as you make your recommendation to the board if you want to make some detailed recommendations
Was there?
along those lines.
Yeah, as I understand it, this is a product of staff and county council. Were any developers invited into the discussion for a session at any point?
We haven't had a separate meeting for the developers, but we noticed a group of the stakeholders that were involved in bringing these earlier meetings together and invited them to the planning commission, and they did come, a number of them, and provided input, both written and verbally, and we've invited them here today as well. So because it was on a very fast track timeline, we thought about trying to have like a outreach meeting beforehand, but we were also at the same time, both Priscilla and I do development reviews, so we work with the development review staff. And so as we were formulating these recommendations, we were also reviewing actual applications and thinking about, okay, these are the types of things we're seeing. And so we were very in tune to what developers were facing that currently have applications submitted. And, we have informal conversations with folks and so forth.
Is there a height limit or level limit on some of these projects that they can't go beyond a certain thing, which would also factor into how many units you could get out of that?
So what we're proposing to modify to create this enhanced program is the chapter in the county code that deals with density bonus. So that's 1712. It does not get into development standards, which are things like heights and setbacks and all of that. All of that is in the zoning code itself. So we're not, because it's already not addressed in the density bonus program, we didn't add it in. The appropriate place for that is really chapter 1310. So all of that stays the same. And part of the reason, we're doing kind of a very careful dance here to try to provide a way to implement the recommendations that were made and our direction that we got from the board in June. If you go too far off in one direction or another or get too creative, you're going to butt up against CEQA constraints, and maybe that's going to require a longer term CEQA analysis. And there was also the mandate to produce this quickly and take it through the hearing and bring it back to the board with something that they could consider adopting an ordinance quickly. And so you can only do so many things before you trigger CEQA requirements. So we've vetted this very carefully.
But you do cite 35 feet and 3 stories in this document you handed out. It's here.
Well, maybe it's a
on page
document.
17.
It's not in chapter 1712 of the county code is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are sections that we're amending in 1310.
Yeah. It's in 1310, yeah, on page 17 at the top. Yeah.
That may have to do with our combining district. It's not part of the density bonus enhancement.
So just wanted to do a time check. We're about 15 minutes from our target adjourn time, and I think that there's more to your presentation than just the density bonus, isn't there?
I'm almost done.
Okay.
And then we want to take public comment as well.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we leave time for that. So, so we'll finish up the presentation. We can just ask folks to hold their questions until we get through that, and then we can hear from the public and deliberate. Thank you.
So again, just to give you some examples, so the different levels we've looked at in this slide is 20 units base, 27 with the existing available density bonus program, and 30 with the enhanced bonus. So here's your 20 unit project. This is Shapiro Knolls, which the county assisted recently. And I couldn't find anything right at 27 or right at 30, but I found one at 29, which is an older project, the Volunteers of America, if anyone remembers that project from many years ago, in Live Oak, which is at 29 units an acre. And again, it's a senior project with smaller units. That's why it's not very noticeable, even though it is a higher density product.
And I could take this moment to update the very astute point that Rosemary pointed out. There is an RM 1.5 district. It includes
This is one of those.
exactly three sites. And yeah, this is one of them. There's another one that's also built out. They're all built out. And there is an inconsistency with the general plan, and that will be part of the sustainability update. So you're right about that. None of them are offering great development opportunities, but you are correct.
Right, and so what I was saying is there's a zoning district, but there's no corresponding general plan district.
But there will be they will be addressed in the sustainability update.
Okay, so just very briefly, there's more detail about this in the report, but these are the 4 bills that were passed in 2016 that modified the state density bonus law. So you'll see in Exhibit C a number of other text changes to the Chapter 1712 that are not related to the enhanced density bonus. They're all driven by these 4 bills. Some of them were making relatively minor changes. The ones that were making, the only one really I would say that was very substantial is the Bloom Bill, AB 2501. There were more sections that were changed by that bill, more procedural stuff. The really big thing, actually 2 things. It did add mixed use as an option, both as a potential project type. So now if you have a mixed use project that has at least 5 new housing dwelling units in it, as well as some non-residential space, that can qualify for density bonus application. And then, on the other hand, if it's a purely residential project on a residential site, and you want to ask for mixed-use zoning as one of your incentives, I don't know why anyone would do that these days, but I think the state had their economics reversed on that one, but anyway, they created that as an optional incentive that you could, as an applicant, you can ask for mixed-use zoning on a residential site. But the biggie here is really more of a standard, a judicial standard that they wrote into the law here, which is if a jurisdiction denies one of these applications, the burden of proof for showing that the applicant didn't meet whatever the various standards are in the state to qualify for one of these bonuses, the burden of proof is on the jurisdiction. That's the reverse of what it has been for the whole 30 years or so that this law has been in existence. So it was always more the burden of proof is on the applicant to show that the jurisdiction was wrong. Now it's the reverse. That's a huge deal. So that's something we're going to be doing some staff training on, and I think the jury's still out in terms of what kind of litigation may happen throughout the state because of that, or how litigation over these issues may change. So it's just kind of a stay tuned on that. And the Nazarian bill on the replacement housing requirements, that was kind of a minor change to the text, but it essentially says that if you're applying for a bonus on a site that has existing dwelling units on them, and they're rental units that are occupied by lower moderate income households, or subject to various different types of restrictions. Maybe it's a rent control ordinance, maybe it's a deed restriction due to a prior subsidy for the units or whatever, that you can't qualify for a density bonus until you include replacement of those units on the site at the same income level. So that's kind of a high bar that the applicants will have to now meet in order to get a density bonus at all if they have existing housing on the site. So that's about all on that. And then questions?
So what I'd like to do, if it's all right with commissioners, is give the public an opportunity to ask questions, make comments before we bring it back to the commission, or we can have some more discussion.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so I'll open it up to public comment, and just ask that folks in the public try to keep their comments to about 3 minutes, just so we can respect the time that we have this room and staff available for the commission. So,
sure. After a while, this is pretty boring, isn't it? Let me pass this out if I may. It's a letter I'm leaving with you. And so I'm Rick Cruz. I am the principal in West Westwind Memory Care, where we serve seniors and unfortunately people with Alzheimer's and other mental care diseases.
Can we sign up at the meeting?
I hope I can remember. It's always hard to get started, so give me a second to kind of get a theme going here. Since I've submitted a project in the county of which staff is very familiar, and we've now spent a fair amount of time with this group as well as the other departments. I'm not here really to talk about my project as much as what we discovered. One of our principal interests is really senior housing. It's evolving. It's changing to what we used to think it ought to be. We're working to keep folks more in their home. A lot of the things that are going on in the county with the ADUs and so forth are really terrific ideas, but hard to implement. What we discovered here is our misinterpretation of the code, where you sit by yourself and you get a couple of properties together and you think you understand it. I had to come and get help from this team, which was terrific. As you are familiar, as I stumble into what I'm introducing to you, is that, and you got it right, the parcels we have in this county going forward are very small. As you said earlier, 43,000 square feet is roughly an acre. If you were to spend some time with us, acquire some of the property that we're acquiring, and we have bought significant property in the community, we're running about 32,000 square feet. And then you start putting the development standards on, and even though this isn't about that, the group is going to have to eventually come back and take a good look at how you actually build on the properties that we're talking about. I am building on those properties, and I'm telling you, it's extremely difficult. Our proposal, and let me stop for a second, I've already presented this to the Planning Commission, the supervisors, and had I understood what was going on earlier, I would have started with you. So let me apologize. I know the sequence, but it's just a matter of opportunity. And we're far from done. After it evolves and gets a little tighter, our most serious visit will be with Zach Friend, because he is the chair this year. And then through his office, he'll maybe go further. Obviously, and I'm holding back on what I'm going to ask you for a second, and I'll hurry. We're looking for your support. So the concept is to allow a developer to take smaller parcels that are not continuous and allow them to bring it under maybe a plan unit development, could be a block or two away, maybe as far as a mile, and be treated the same way as if we had a full parcel to get the bonuses and some of the other benefits. Obviously, I didn't go too far. I'm going to end it here, and hopefully you might have a couple questions, but I am going to tell you this, which is kind of shocking because it seems to be against the common judgment. I encourage you to have a meeting with developers, because when you get us together, we're talking, we kind of push back on some of the data and some of the assumptions. We can, in fact, make a profit, not a lot, but a little bit of profit, building mixed-use incomes. But we need help from the county. The subtle point is our group has now spent about pretty close to $70,000 doing some market analysis and some trend analysis. The trend analysis really starts in Silicon Valley. That's what's happening here. It's not locally. So if you go around town and ask people the same basic questions, you're not going to really get useful data for development. I'd love to have time to bring people in and you hear that so you can process really what we're asking. So to sum this up, we're asking to get the same benefits a full site would get by bringing smaller sites together, and we will meet all the same obligations, all the same density, parking, and et cetera. And we have now presented a project to staff, and if there's time, you can talk to them, and they can tell you a little bit of what we're thinking. And that's my summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to address that?
Comments. Jane Moore with Eden Housing. So I appreciate the document. I just want to make some comments. On the density, I would ask you, I know 30 units per acre might be a stretch for Santa Cruz County. It's the norm everywhere else. And I would ask you to not have a cap on that. If you looked at the pictures that Suzanne put up, you notice the projects that were at 30 units had 3 stories. So the one in Half Moon Bay, this one, and there are other 3-story ones. I did a project of 3 stories on a podium in downtown Watsonville beside the Metro Center when I was with Mid-Penn. That's 60 units per acre, and it fits right into the neighborhood. So I think, and especially, that's a little more urban downtown, but especially if you require projects to have 2 stories on the frontage of the street, and then you build up to the 3 stories, it works. Secondly, I think the deferral fees is wonderful. It's great. It makes us a huge difference in development to us, and we really appreciate that. On page 20, you use the term define reasonable. I'd like you to define reasonable documentation because that's just nebulous, and I think it should be defined in the document. So that's something you get back to us on, or at the next meeting, or discuss. The parking standards with density bonus, I know they can be lowered, but the parking standards of 1.5 spaces for a 1-bedroom, 2 for a 3-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, and 2.5 spaces for a 3-bedroom, and then adding on another 20% on top of that. That takes a lot of room to park, and without doing podiums, it's difficult. I would wonder if you could consider reducing the 1-bedrooms to 1.25 or 1. Don't have a problems with 2 bedrooms at 2, and 3 bedrooms I think could be 2, because a lot of 3 bedrooms have children and not adults. So and then adding the 20% on, maybe rather than adding 20% on number of number of parking spaces, you consider adding a 25% on the total units and not on the spaces themselves. But 2 more comments. The height of 35 or 3 stories, it might be okay. Sometimes we bump up against that height by a foot or so. So you might consider revisiting that. And lastly, I think that might be it. Yeah, I think that's it for now, but we do appreciate your work on this.
Anyone else? Sure. Okay, Tim.
Tim Welby, speaking for Affordable Housing Now. Just a little bit of background about this. So the Board of Supervisors had discussions about, well, why isn't there more building of the kind of housing that we need? And so developers were saying something, and advocates for affordable housing were saying something, and the Board of Supervisors said, why don't you get together? And so we did. So there are nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, and affordable housing advocates that got together to try to hash through some ideas, and that's kind of where some of this came from. And so...
And were those ideas communicated to staff, Tim?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And so Affordable Housing Now supports what the staff came up with. And there are a couple of key things about this that we think are important. One is that the density bonus system really favors building rental units, which is what we're most in need of. And that's just critical to affordable housing. And the second item is that it encourages smaller units. Again, something that we need. So the for-profit developers in particular, who previously wanted to maximize their profits by building larger units, came to the table and said, okay, well, so if we had some of these bonus densities, we could build smaller units. This would pencil out for us. And so that's part of what's important about this. So we support this. We see it as a potential of developing some affordable housing units for market rate people who are going to build these, and it's not going to count. The taxpayers are going to have to come up with money to build those affordable housing units. And then the not-for-profit developers can, because the land cost is so high, the size of their projects is getting bigger and bigger in order for them to work for them. She speaks better to this than I do. And so the whole package is working for lots of different kinds of development. Thank you.
May I add one point that's important to what he was saying?
Yeah.
if you were able to build that, particularly for a senior, always remember, and they mostly say, I'm one, and Bud is one, but the rest of you are too young. No, not you. But you get a second bonus that you can't always measure and see, and that is an existing house where a senior lives, single family probably, is now vacating that house, making it available without adding another door to the community and moving into the smaller unit. And this is really what we're looking at. So if we could do that, and unfortunately, and by the way, staff has been terrific. I really want to compliment. They've educated us well and helped us see some of the strategies on the roadmap. But you, as a housing group, may want to really get into the development standards to help both the design of a mixed income unit where you could have rental and for sale, and make it easier for us to process. The last fact you must remember, no matter what happens, it's hard to build anything in this town outside of a single family home in less than 4 to 5 years. So that's a long investment we have to engage in. And if you can help us simplify our lives, I think we can produce better product.
Thank you.
Over here, one last thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, well, there's still opportunity for anyone else to have 3 minutes, so if you'd like to take that opportunity.
I just wanted to say, time is money. Time is getting these projects happening. And somehow or another, we talk about permit streamlining and so forth. Looks like there's layers and layers of stuff. You know, it looks like we vetted it so much that perhaps we could kind of squish it down a little bit so that it doesn't take so much time for the developers and for people who are scrambling for housing now. We all know that. We've seen what's going on in Santa Cruz now, and it's amazing. And the whole thing is about supply. The mixed use thing is a great idea. It's being bandied about, but we need federal financing vehicles, and that's a missing element. And when you're talking mixed use, you've got to be careful because the parking issues, they'll just get eaten up. So there won't be parking availability for the housing. So somehow or another, a lot of this stuff has to be vetted, and I think we need to start getting on the bandwagon of realizing, I mean, I'm old, and it went by really fast, guys, and I'd like to see some housing in Santa Cruz happen for these young folks coming down the road. Okay, thank you.
Becky, do you want to have?
I do, thank you. Becky Steinberger. First of all, I want to point out in the documentation handed out, it jumps from page 8 to page 49, so I'm not sure what's missing in here, but there's a lot that appears to be missing in my packet anyway. So I was at the Planning Commission meeting when they heard this presentation, and thank you for the good presentation. What bothers me is with our combining is that it looks to me as a member of the public that the developers get to essentially become the planners for a county. And I think we have to be very careful about that, and instead of looking at how is the community going to be served, how is the infrastructure going to be addressed for these applications by developers for our combining districts, when the approving body, the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors, may not have the information that they need to have in terms of infrastructure needed to support it, but yet they're going to be asked to approve it. So I think that's a very dangerous situation for our county. I would also like to see more attention and bonuses given to projects that include open space or community garden area. I think we have to be careful about not only providing a place to live, but a quality of life for people in these areas. And that's huge. We don't want to create ghettos. We really don't. And I think I also want to point out that everything you're hearing today was on the Board of Supervisors consent agenda on June 12th. It was on the consent agenda, and I want to thank Supervisor Leopold for pulling it off and having a discussion and making it come back to you for a public hearing today and to the Planning Commission. At the Planning Commission meeting, Commissioner Guth was very concerned about this mixed income issue, and that developers could be given all the perks of a density bonus, but not necessarily having to come through with all of the units. And that's really something to think about. There was discussion because it was stated that these changes would be CEQA exempt when they are not. And that was pointed out to the commission by Whitwer Parkin. And I think you really need to be thinking about that as well. In terms of the public planned unit development, to prove that there is a public benefit for that, the new state law says that anything with 20 units or over is automatically considered a public benefit. And I think we need to really look at how that impacts. Planned unit developments are not always great. I drive through Aptos Village project every day, and I'll tell you, it's disgusting. It is not in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. All of the perks that they got with doing a planned unit development are not to the advantage of the public benefit. So in moving forward with any action of planned unit developments, we have to be very careful about what kind of concessions we would allow. Some that have been allowed in the Aptos Village project will, in the opinion of some of the fire responders, create problems for response. I want to ask, why did the Board of Supervisors take the action they did in 2015 to allow the developer's choice? What was the impetus behind that? Why? And how much is in the account for the Measure J of these developers in lieu fees? Are they getting spent? By the inflation and devaluation, it's losing money, and I really urge the Board of Supervisors to reverse that action, which, if you read Measure J, I don't even know if that was legal, because any major changes to Measure J were supposed to have been approved by the voters. I think that's worth considering. I also want to bring up again...
We're about 4.5 minutes in, so
okay.
Wrap up your comments,
all right.
Please. Thank you.
I'm sorry. This is a lot of material.
I get it.
I'm still curious, and I quizzed you after the Planning Commission, why Aptos Blue and the Canterbury Village affordable housing projects are not part of your presentation, because they are dense and very affordable projects, and I really think I would like to see those included in your future presentations. In terms of rentals, if you read the Measure H, it includes in it that under state constitutional law, the public must approve low rent rental projects. And that's actually part of the Measure 8, that the county voters would approve 1,041 low rent rental units. And that's part of Title or Article 34 in the state constitution. And finally, I just want to point out that Measure J, those words were eliminated. They were crossed out of the latest version of the county's housing element when it was updated by the Board of Supervisors. And the last thing I want to say is that, yes, this does propose at a 75% bonus density to cap it at 30 units per acre, but is it possible for developers to seek a variance and get a higher density? I think that's a concern. I have more, but I'll stop.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Thank you, members of the public who had questions and comments. I want to bring it back to the board now. Offer an opportunity to ask the staff any additional questions before we make any comments. We have this one staff member who needs to leave shortly, so anyone have any?
I just have a quick question about what is the status of the constraint water districts placed on new developments, for instance, like Soquel Creek Water District, with regard to the numbers, if you're going over what is a cap or close to a cap?
Yeah, so to answer that question, just to step back for a moment, I'll remind everybody that any of these development projects would individually be subject to CEQA when they're proposed, right? So we're looking at code amendments, an ordinance that we're processing with the CEQA exemption. None of these projects are inherently exempt from CEQA. Each one will be reviewed on a case-by-case. water availability to the project will be part of that analysis, and so it'll just vary based on the site, what water district they're in, what the amount of water is available. There continues to be a state law in effect that says for 100% affordable housing projects or projects that include restricted lower income units, typically that's going to be mainly in your 100% affordable projects, your nonprofit projects, they get priority to get a will serve letter if they're located in a district that would otherwise have a shortage of capacity for new housing units. So if you've got, 20 market rate projects in the pipeline and one 100% lower income units, that one needs to be served before the other ones. The water districts are generally all familiar with that requirement, and they're responsible for implementing that prioritization. But that would all come out in the CEQA review of the proposed project.
Yeah, well, I had a project with the opposite happened. Water District said, sorry, you want 94 senior housing units, but you only have enough water for 42, which made it impossible to do the project. And
That
was
can
in Green Bay.
happen. That can
And
happen.
we showed them exactly what the Coastal Act required and the state law on that same very issue. And they said, sorry, that's the way our board deals with this, and we're not making any changes.
You could always litigate, I guess.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to continue this discussion.
We're over time and half moon base up from the coast.
On page 6, there's a sentence about the density bonus mechanism provides an opportunity for fixed use projects to request a waiver from the general plan policy and county code, which limits the percentage of residential space in mixed use projects. Exactly what is that talking about?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I kind of glossed over that in the presentation. So when I was talking about under current county code and current state law for the density bonus, when I mentioned there's some perks that you get when you apply and qualify for a density bonus, one of those is something called incentives or concessions, and a second thing is called a waiver of development standards. They sound very similar, but they're slightly different. So on the mixed use item, we analyzed that in our planning staff here and looked at essentially what has been raised by certain applicants for actual applications recently in the past several years is on mixed use sites. The county in its 1994 general plan land use element has some language that places a cap on basically the ratio, if you have a mixed-use project, the ratio between residential built space versus non-residential space on that proposed project. So it says for market rate, if the housing in the project is all market rate, they cannot exceed a 50-50 ratio. So half the project has to be commercial or other, office or what have you, half would be residential. If it's an 100% affordable project, it could go up to 67%. If that applicant applies for and qualifies for a density bonus for that site, now keep in mind that's kind of a high bar. There's certain variables that need to be in place, right? There needs to be some underlying residential zoning on that site, okay, which is in place with certain commercial districts, but not all of them. Then they could ask for a waiver of that general plan language for that particular project if they submit evidence to the record that shows that that one standard is physically precluding from their project as proposed from being built. The approving body would then consider that request for the waiver and decide, did they meet the bar, did the evidence they show was compelling or not. And now the burden of proof is on the jurisdiction if you deny the request. So it's an interesting dynamic. That's all in place under current law, also in current county code chapter 1712. So we're not needing to change anything on that, but it's in place. It's something that I guess when this issue came up earlier, people were not familiar enough with the current density bonus statutes and so forth, that they didn't realize that that waiver could be used to resolve that issue.
Mr. Chair, I would make a recommendation to approve the set of near-term code amendments, if that is what you are looking for the sake of further discussion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Great, thank you. Is there any further discussion by the commission? Any additional questions?
So what's the motion again?
I think it's the motion to do what staff is.
To approve as presented by staff the near-term code amendments.
So I suggest a slightly alternate, we're not approving anything, we're just recommending to the planning commission and the board.
We have some language on the second page.
Yeah.
If you want to look at that. It's pretty
Yeah, I understand, but to be moving the exact recommendation that staff has
Got it,
made.
yeah.
Exactly.
And that's what I think I'm seconding.
Yes.
Did that alleviate your concern?
Yeah, that is fine. I'm assuming staff will take the public comment to the planning commission on September 26th as well.
Yeah.
The comments that were made today will be bubbled up to the planning commission.
And I guess I would just say, this comes to us sort of full circle for a process that we started on this commission more than 2 years ago to do a sort of ad hoc committee that would interview various stakeholders in the community, which included nonprofit housing developers, market rate developers, affordable housing advocates, and other groups, and really took from them a number of suggestions about how to do something in the near term to provide some relief in our housing, affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing. And the staff took that information as well as things that they were already working on and created these near-term amendments that were unanimously approved by our commission and that received unanimous support from the board in terms of the staff continuing to study them. So we continue to work here on a process. Just kind of want to put that in context for what we're doing today in case others haven't been familiar with it, and to remind us, since we only every 2 months, what our process has been so far. So there's been a lot of work that has gone into this so far, and I really do want to compliment our staff for taking all of that feedback plus what they were working on and developing it into something that we can do in the short term to provide some incentives to create more affordable housing. So I appreciate your motion and your second, and so I'll just go ahead and call the question. Sorry, public comment is over.
But I just want a clarification. It says staff recommends that you discuss the 3 initiatives described, and in attachment 1, I have no attachment 1. What is attachment 1?
All of those pages here is attachment 1. So all of this material that was in their packets. It's attachment 1.
So I feel like
So is that what's handed out here for the public to see?
Yes.
It says attachment 2.
It's kind of confusing. There's an attachment 1 to attachment 2. It's a little confusing, but it's the same. I'm balancing the way the Planning Commission titles their exhibits and the way HAC titles their agenda materials. So it was a little awkward. That's how it came out.
Thank you. Okay, so if there isn't any further discussion, we have a motion in a second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Thank you.
I'd like to recommend one further thing that was raised by Mr. De La Cruz, and that is that we ask county council whether or not his idea of considering non-contiguous parcels is lawful, because I don't think you're going to get any traction on that unless county council agrees.
And if that is a motion, Mr. Chair, I would second that.
I don't know that we can make a motion on something that wasn't agendized.
I think you're right.
So I mean, I think that Mr. Washburn, I think you can refer him to county council to get direction.
So can I share some quick information? You're absolutely right on that point. After I present this to the supervisors, particularly Zach's staff, then we're being asked to write a more formal presentation with details that would then be resubmitted. And basically, I'm informing you of something we're asking you to include in the future. And it needs to go back to the Planning Commission and so forth. So the legality steps are ahead of us, but we've also researched this with our own attorney, and there's nothing that prohibits it. It's one of the problems that when there's no language in the law, you have flexibility if you like that idea. There's nothing that says you can't do it, but obviously we need to, get all the parts working appropriately for the county.
Good, you get my point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And we take that burden on, so we're not asking staff or anyone to do anything yet.
All right.
Not yet, anyway.
So we, earlier we had the housing activities update, but we're going to switch the order, so that's been taken care of, so maybe we can adjourn.
Well, for adjournment.
Do we need a motion? Well, in case we do.
Move adjournment.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Suzanne?